Welcome everybody to the Animal Care Wednesday webinar. I'm Heidi Carroll and I work with South Dakota State University Extension in Livestock Stewardship. The Animal Care Wednesday webinars are a partnership between South Dakota, Iowa, Missouri, and Nebraska Extension folks bringing kind of hot animal care topics, just some overviews that usually provide us in the animal industries field and the 4-H field a little bit of insight into what we can do to help our constituents that we work with on a daily basis. Just if you have any issues, please use that chat box feature. We will go ahead and address questions at the end of the presentation, but feel free to enter your questions at any time of the presentation in that chat box. Today's recording the webinar will be recorded today, and the recording will be posted to our Animal Care Wednesday webinar website, and that link is in your chat box as well. So if you need to view it or share it with those who were not able to attend today, that is a resource you'll have at a later date as well. So let's get into our topic for today's webinar. Today we have Gary Thome. Gary is an animal welfare specialist and he works with Validus, which is a division of where your food comes from. And Gary has some expertise on the assessing of livestock production operations in various species. And so a great resource when we start talking about how can we take some of those skills and apply them to a unique situation which is very visual to our public. And so that's where this topic of assessing fairground animal facilities kind of came from, because these are unique facilities. They're definitely not a production-based facility, but they can pose some interesting animal handling challenges. So that's why we thought Gary might be a great resource to provide a little bit of insights into what we can learn from the industry side and apply to these unique facilities. Gary has experience with both the common swine industry audit, as well as the dairies and even some of the auction market assessments. So with that, I'm going to turn over the webinar to Gary. And like I said, if you have questions as he's presenting, take time to just type them into the chat box and we'll address them as we go. Thank you, Gary, and take it away.
Good morning, everyone. Very glad to be able to spend a little bit of time with all you folks. A little bit of background for myself. I graduated from the University of Minnesota in agriculture education and taught high school ag for 7 years, and then moved back to my home area where I did farm business management instruction through the community college system for over 30 years. Upon retiring from that, I've established my own consulting business and also have been doing auditing with Validus since 2012. Through this whole process, my wife and I did farm, and was always our goal that if any of our children did want to be involved in farming, that we would be able to give them the opportunity. And at the present time, we farm with 2 sons raising corn and pork. Through this auditing education, it has become very obvious that the industries as a whole have made some tremendous strides on the farm with regard to animal handling and animal care. I think the information that I hope to be able to present will make sense to everyone, and please do, if you do have some questions or concerns in any of these regards, to please ask. If we look at the areas that we'll try and cover and assess today, the first one is are there problems with your fair facilities in regard to housing the livestock? And are you able to properly move this livestock safely around at the fair to the show rings and wash areas and all those kinds of things? And then, are the facilities that you have, are they outdated for today's livestock? If you stop and think about, 25, 30 years ago, the size of the animals that we were producing and showing has changed pretty drastically in almost every species. In regard to SOPs and site requirements, I'm basing a lot of the stuff that you're going to see here on items that are, as mentioned, they're in the common swine industry audit or the beef and dairy animal welfare reviews and so forth. One of the things that every livestock site should have is a national premise ID number. And this has probably gained even more traction in the last 6-8 months with regard to the concern about, foreign animal diseases, especially with China having African swine fever. The signage that each building should have is not only for people to find their way around and what they're looking for, but we should also have on there some of the information in regard to the fact that, we'll have zero tolerance policies stated and should be clearly understood. And then also a mechanism that if there should happen to be any acts of abuse, how can this be reported? The emergency action plan information, the phone numbers that fire and maybe police and so forth, or if there's an accident and you need a number for an ambulance and those kinds of things should be available. Biosecurity requirements, I think those are things that depending upon the species will vary, and the number of items there may or may not be pertinent at the time of a specific livestock show, be it just a swine show, for example, or you may have some biosecurity requirements that you're going to post. Caretaker training, I think, is also real important, that the public be aware of the fact that most all of the packers now are requiring that anything coming to them have PQA and BQA certification for the producer that's supplying them. And I know in our county here, that's one of the requirements for all the 4-Hers, for example, who are going to be sending their animals to Hormel at the end of the show. Feeding and watering protocols, I think sometimes the general public doesn't understand or have any idea in regard to that, but you want to be sure and have that understood and not only be visible, but make them aware. Veterinary location and contact information, I think, is kind of self-explanatory. Many fairs now have a fair office for the veterinarian, and in case there are problems. We take a look at buildings and equipment. I think we all want to stop and make sure that things are in a good state of repair and that we can prevent any injuries before we'd have any accidents of any kind. But we have to take a look at the penning, and as we mentioned, size of animals has changed, and so consequently you take swine, for example. Is the penning high enough so that we're not going to have animals jumping over and getting mixed in with others and fighting and so forth? That's a concern. The type of flooring, that there again, has changed in some cases. In some of the older facilities, everything was ground floor, and it took quite a bit of bedding material and so forth. And some of the newer facilities now are all concrete and so forth. So we need to take the bedding and whatever we're going to use for a foundation in those fairly seriously. Chutes, those are as far as getting livestock in and out, we want to make sure that they're long enough so that we don't have something that's way too steep, that we're fighting the animals both coming in and going out. Alleys and walkways, there again, as dairy cattle and beef and so forth, some of these things have gotten larger. The stalls are bigger, and consequently, in some cases, we've cut down on the walkways, and it makes it hard for people to get animals in and out, or visitors to take a look and observe what is there and so forth. Wash racks and fitting areas. Here again, we want to be able to have the livestock properly fitted, and we need a place to do that. And most of those take extra space, and in a lot of with all of our fairs basically being the vast majority in the hot summer, we want to make sure that we've got potentially some shade that can be used so that they're not out in the sun and so forth. And here again with washing, how are we handling that water? Where's it going? And then take proper use of that as well. Feeders, I think those are typically provided by the show person, and we want something that's appropriate for the species and the animals. Water, that's probably one of the most important things, especially in the summertime, that they have access to water at all times, and make sure that it's clean. Handling equipment, the sort boards, the show sticks, and so forth. We want those things to be appropriate and used properly. The show ring and placement pens, here again, most of these animals are fairly soft-footed as a rule, and consequently we want the show ring to be able to show them in the best possible way. And so we want something that they're going to move easily around in and be able to place them in pens versus say, okay, the first place animal, you go to that corner, and the second place you go to that corner. And sometimes it's kind of hard to make a nice show out of facilities that don't allow us to do things in an orderly fashion. As far as the building environment is concerned, I think the biggest thing there probably is the fact that we want to have proper air quality, not only for the animals, but the people as well. And I've seen several situations where this is somewhat of a problem in the fact that they've replaced some of these older buildings that were, built, say, back in the 20s, where it was just an open pole type facility and provided shade and lots of air movement and so forth. And in some cases, these fairgrounds have gone to a building that's maybe much larger and so forth, but they're looking at the ability to maybe use this for more things, or use it for storage for things during the off season, and consequently it isn't necessarily laid out or built or ventilated properly for animals and people. Adequate airflow to maintain proper thermal behavior. My thought here is that in some cases we've got these steer calves that have been in a refrigerator all summer growing hair, and then we bring them out and we tie them up to 80 degree, 90 degree heat, and all of a sudden they're panting and foaming at the mouth and so forth. And so consequently, those are things we want to avoid. Proper flooring here again, as far as for the comfort of the animal as well as the people going through. We want to make sure that we're able to take care of them in that fashion. Gating for each species. Here again, if the hogs or the sheep or the goats or those sorts of things, we want to make sure that it's properly sized and the pens are properly sized so that the animals have adequate space and they can move around, not too many in a pen and so forth. Here again, as far as like we were talking about walkways or alleys, we want to make sure that there's plenty of room for the caretakers to do their work and have their equipment, and also to provide room for the the spectators to be able to see the animals and visit with people if they so desire. Proper access to feed. This, I think, varies a little bit with livestock in regard to maybe you're going to have hay in front of dairy cattle all the time. You may be feeding the sheep and pigs maybe twice a day and that sort of thing, and then getting the pans and so forth out of there so the pens stay clean. Access to clean water. This is probably the most important if we look at any species and having the ability for them to take care of their requirements as far as making sure that they don't get dehydrated and so forth. Dry place to lay down. It doesn't make any difference if we're talking cattle being stalled, or we've got sheep in a pen and hogs. We want to make sure that it's clean and dry, and here again, that's going to help tremendously with the odor and some of those kinds of things. There isn't much worse than a hot, muggy summer day and you have a lot of wet pens and the odor that that can create. Proper pest control, probably flies is one of the biggest ones. We do have, in some cases, we have to worry about rodents with facilities that aren't used all the time, and we need to be sure and have that under control well before the fair is going to take place. As far as loading and unloading, chutes and trailers, we want to make sure that, they're properly designed for the animals that are coming in and they're wide enough and so forth. They got the proper type of flooring, not too steep for animals to be coming down on and so forth. Cleat spacing, here again, that's important for, especially if, we're taking them up a chute and so forth, and as well as possibly, coming down so that they can, especially if they're fairly steep. No possible areas for injury. Here, mainly thinking of gating, that someone could get, caught behind and a big steer turns around and pinches them and does a good job of crushing and so forth. So, we want to make sure that we've got things properly set up so that those kinds of things can't happen. Proper aligning of chutes and trailers. In some of these fairgrounds, the design was meant for a pickup or a pickup with a small trailer, and now we're trying to load out with semis and so forth, and there's just not room enough to get properly aligned like they should, and we make makeshift things so that we can get things loaded in and out, and sometimes those can be a little bit dangerous. Make sure the trailer's in good state of repair. In some cases, it's a matter of maybe this trailer only gets used, once or twice a year for this 4-H project. And we want to make sure the flooring in them is good and all those sorts of things as they're being looked at by the general public and so on. Properly equipped for weather. Here, I think one of the things maybe would be being able to water or sprinkle the livestock in the trailer, particularly in extremely hot weather. And a lot of the newer trailers are equipped with a water supply and a sprinkling system. Properly equipped for the species and phase of production. I think this here again is a matter of what size of trailer are you using, and are you double decking and so forth. In that regard, one of the biggest things probably is don't overcrowd. And I think this is one of the things that the general public, if they're standing there watching and this trailer being loaded, as to how tight these animals might be. Showring and the people doing the showing, probably one of the most important things in that regard is proper hygiene. And this goes all the way back from the pen and the stall that the animals are coming from, the walkways that they're using. If you have beef show and the animals are coming in through a walkway that's got divots in it or holes in it, or you got pockets where there's water standing and those sorts of things. We want to try and avoid, those if we can. And the show ring and show persons, here again, I think the general hygiene there is normally really pretty good. And the show rings, if they've got sawdust down, we want to make sure that we're able to, keep the dust down, and we got to be careful about not too much water, or that sawdust can almost turn into manure-like material and so forth. So we got to be careful in that regard. Staging and show ring entrance area is probably one of the things that in many fair they're lacking, the ability to properly stage and get these animals into the ring. Many times there's not enough room for spectators, and consequently, they crowd the area where you're trying to bring animals in and or take them out. And so those things are important to have, gating and fencing and those sorts of things in place so that we can properly do those. Properly sized show ring for the number in the class or the species that you're showing. This can be, a problem in regard to a large beef show, for example, not having enough space to properly, show them so that the judge can take a good look at them and be able to place them properly. Penning and placing, here again, like I mentioned before, is it the ability for 1 through 10 to be panned, and many judges, they'll, discuss the placings with the crowd, and it's tough to do that if you don't have some way to properly handle them, and it's hard for the show people if they have to just try and hold them in one spot until they're called out. Showing equipment for each species and the person showing and the show ring staff is important, be it sort boards or, those sorts of things to be able to help the people and make sure that the show runs smooth and to help the judge as well and take care of that. Proper showmanship, I think we want to be careful, make sure that this isn't just for the showmanship contest, that we're having showmanship both in and out of the show ring. The equipment, audio-wise, I think here again, in some cases, if they can't hear, it's tough to get a class started if you've got 1 or 2 people missing and they didn't realize it, because there's not enough volume in the barn to let them know that they're due in the ring or that they're due in the staging area and so forth. And the crowd really appreciates the ability to hear what the judge has to say. Proper show ring support staff and assist the show persons and the judge, I think that's fairly self-explanatory, that it'll move much smoother if you have those people that can assist with that type of thing. And this is probably one of the areas that we way overlook is adequate crowd control for entering the arena and viewing the show and so forth. And it's extremely important that we have the ability to handle the people, but also maintain the flow of the animals in such a way that everything goes smooth and everybody's safe. Heidi, that's what I had.
I think that was a great starting point and overview of kind of where we should look at our local level, whether it be for exhibition shows or even our county fairs. So thank you, Gary. As we start looking at questions, you can type your questions into the chat box. As you're doing that, I am going to initiate a short poll that you can just answer your questions as you're listening to Gary respond to the questions. So you'll see that pop up on your screen there. So go ahead and click your responses. To get us started with questions, what would you say is the importance of assessing fairgrounds or exhibition grounds for animals?
I think probably the most important aspect is the facilities that we're going to be holding these animals in while they're at the fair. Are they, properly spaced so that, we aren't overcrowding them? Are they properly ventilated so that, the animals aren't getting overheated or that sort of thing? And then after that, I think it's a matter of looking at, okay, how far from where they're being housed to where you're going to show, and being able to take them, in such a way that, we aren't affecting, the crowd that's around them, and still having adequate space so that people can actually view and see the show.
Great. Which area do you think might be the easiest or quickest to improve if a fair is looking at trying to improve something? And obviously, since these are a lot of publicly, locally owned operations, then what might be the cheapest item that they could look at improving animal welfare?
I think it varies somewhat between species, but I think most of the places now that have had shows over the years, in most cases, the people that and the 4-Hers and the FFA people and open class, most of those have taken the time and the effort to have adequate equipment themselves if they know what the problem might be, given the facilities that they're in. Be it having large enough fans or enough fans, being able to open up doors and be it just ventilation doors and so forth. I know in a number of fairgrounds, they've actually gone through their facilities and remodeled them by just putting in ventilation doors that can be opened. and that, has a tremendous impact on air quality and the ability to, move air. The most important thing I think to remember in any ventilation is, where the air comes in. We can move air out a lot of different ways, be it, through ceiling fans or wall fans and that sort of thing. But the fresh air coming in is the most important thing, and where it comes from and how we can get it to the animals.
Great. One other question that comes up would be if an area is identified for improvement, what might you suggest for a way to bring that up at a fair board meeting in advance of a summer fair? Like, how would you go about bringing this to the attention of the local group?
Well, I think the most important thing probably is if it's something that's causing a potential harmful effect on either the show people or the crowd, and talking about safety is number one. If you're going to be able to do something that's going to eliminate a problem along those lines, and after that, I think it goes down to then what impact are we going to be able to have if we have to discuss something in regard to not only the safety of the people that are involved, but then also the ability to safely handle the livestock themselves and or house them properly. And what is it going to take in order to make the changes? And sometimes a lot of these changes aren't very costly. It's in some cases I've seen, for example, where they've had problems with crowd control, just putting up a walkway with a picket fence on each side so that the public it's high enough that they can't get over it, and yet it's something that controls the crowd and allows the people and the livestock to go in and out of the show ring without having a lot of problems.
That's a great suggestion. You did make comment about the types of signage, and you referenced a zero tolerance policy and stating how to go about reporting acts of animal abuse. Could you elaborate maybe on some examples there that would be appropriate to the local level for us?
Well, any audit that is done on farm, one of the things that every species has adopted is the fact that there shall be no willful acts of abuse. And in, I think, almost every case, if an individual is accused of an act of abuse, most every species has their policy written in such a way that it is the result, or the result of that is, termination from their job. And I think it's important in the case of a fair where we're actually out and the public is watching, every move we make, that we make them aware that as livestock producers, we don't accept the fact that there's any willful acts of abuse. And it's simple to, say that, but I think it's also important to portray that in light of the general public being able to, really look over our shoulder and see, every move we're making in a county fair situation. And so I think the ability to have even a phone number or a web address or a place where people can text it and that sort of thing is all it's going to take to let the public know that we're serious about how we're taking care of our animals, and the fact that we as individuals don't accept any kind of act of abuse. And it isn't that this is something new. I think it's something we've always believed in, but it's something that we've made a much larger, greater effort to emphasize, say, in the past decade.
Well, thank you so much for your expertise and your input on this topic, Gary. I really appreciate it. It definitely gave some good things to think about and to take back to our local levels across all of our states. So thank you very much for your time. Um, Hopefully everybody who's on and our next Animal Care Wednesday webinar will be August 7th and same time at 11 o'clock Central Time. And so we look forward to seeing everybody again in August. And the recording for today's webinar will be posted at the animalscience.unl.edu Animal Care Resource webpage. Thank you very much and have a great day.